is he going to succeed? Is it feasible what he's proposing? And how is it going to be carried out?
It's like, Antaeus in Greek mythology, who drew his strength from his mother, the earth, and the way that Hercules beat him was by picking him up and lifting him off the ground, and then he could break his back and crush him. The main conclusion that we draw from the discussion we've had about New York and the United States and about Sudan, we need a revolutionary party of the working class.
Yeah. Welcome to the Against the Stream podcast, the communist podcast which analyzes world events in order to reveal the class interests that shape them. While we aim for the highest objectivity, we do not claim to be impartial. We stand unapologetically on the side of the workers, the youth, and the poor, the ones who make the world go round. This podcast is for them. On Tuesday, we saw the victory of Zohran Mamdani in the New York mayoral election. Mamdani is a left-winger and a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. Meanwhile, in the past few weeks, we've seen a new chapter in the Sudanese civil war with the fall of El-Fasher to the rapid support forces and the brutal killing of thousands of civilians there. While these two events might seem a world apart, in reality they reflect the same phenomenon, the complete dead end of the capitalist system which is unable to provide a civilized existence for the majority of humanity. My name is Hamid Alizadeh, and I'm here today with Josh Holroyd. Welcome, Josh. This is the first time on the podcast. Josh is a member of the International Secretariat of the Revolutionary Communist International. He is also the editor of our theoretical magazine, In Defense of Marxism, which will feature a long piece on Sudan, the Sudanese revolution, and the civil war, in fact. When is it due, Josh?
On the 15th of January.
Okay, well, that would be great for our listeners and our comrades to read that and to have something to look forward to. Now, Josh, we'll start with Zohran Mamdani.
Okay.
I saw that communism was trending on Twitter yesterday. At least on my feed, it was trending number one. It's quite a result.
Absolutely.
I mean, I can list out the basics here. I want to hear your comments. The election was about the turnout was about double the amount of people who came out last time around for the election, for the mayoral elections. And Mamdani got 50.4% of the vote, 1 million votes. He was standing against Andrew Cuomo, who is an old Democratic aristocrat, we can say, for the Democratic Party, and Curtis Sliwa, who's a Republican, who got 7.1 votes. So basically, he stood
7.1%.
Sorry, that's might as well.
Yeah, not many.
Didn't really count. But Mamdani beat both of them. Both of the candidates of the establishment, they had the support of the totality of the billionaire class.
Yep.
The whole of Wall Street. Donald Trump came out in support of Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah.
He was supposed to hate the Democrats. They were deep state trying to get him. But he came out in support of Cuomo. I don't know how much that helped Cuomo. That might have actually undercut him. And yet Mamdani managed to win against all of these. As a person who was completely unknown, a year ago he was polling at 1 or 2%.
Yeah.
And he managed to get a majority, not a plurality, a majority vote against against both of these, and the entire American establishment, political establishment in reality. What do you think that that represents?
Well, yeah, I agree. It's a highly significant result. And one very clear thing that it represents is something that you've been talking about on the podcast for a very long time, actually, which is this accumulation of rage directed at the establishment as a whole, including the Democratic establishment.
Yes.
I know that Mamdani ran as a Democrat, but they were not voting for the National Democratic Party and the Democratic establishment. And not as well as this rage, also an enormous desire for something better. A lot of Mamdani supporters on results night were talking about finally we feel, there was one quote in particular that I thought was quite significant, where one of his supporters is, finally we feel, at least here in New York, that we have some kind of control over our lives. So in addition to just a kind of resentment and a rage at the elites, the ruling class, that are constantly hammering them, humiliating them, treating them like dirt, that is an important part of class consciousness, but that's only one side of it. Rage and resentment alone is not enough. What you're also starting to see is a sense of, I'm talking about the beginnings of a process here, or maybe, one or two steps on, but a sense among working class people that actually we can do things to change this, that if we fight, we can surprise the establishment, we can outmaneuver the establishment, and we can start to get results. Of course, we're talking about electoral results and not necessarily policies being put into effect yet, but I found that to be certainly very significant.
Yeah. And I mean, the hysteria of the bourgeois was really palpable. I, for my sins, subscribed to the Wall Street Journal.
Right.
It's only $2 or £2 a month or something.
Or the journals are available.
But I mean, the amount of hysterical articles in the past few months about Mamdani, the landlords were enraged. They were talking about moving their business, or business people were talking about moving their business out of New York. There was lots of plots and schemes going on to how to undermine him. 23 billionaires poured in money into. There were two super PACs. So one, pro Cuomo, which had loads of Republicans and Democrats in it. And then there was one which is just anti-Mamdani, which got like, I think like $7 billion or something like that. In total, million. In total, I think they raised around $40 million against Mamdani. Mamdani raised around $10 million. And what was he standing on? This is the dichotomy. This is the absurdity of the situation. What was he standing on? The most known parts of his program, which is what people saw, was a rent freeze for 2 million rent stabilized tenants. I think there's 1 million
apartments. Yeah,
apartments. Too many people living there. So a rent freeze. These are apartments that are under special law in New York, which means that their rent increases are controlled every year. There's like 3, 4, 5% increase, and there's a board that kind of determines that. This means that they haven't gone up as much in rent price as some of the highly priced market rent apartments. They're still quite expensive, but compared to normal market rent, much cheaper, obviously. He wants to freeze that. He wants free buses and fast buses. The average bus speed in New York is about 8 miles an hour, I think, which is, I think turtles have been seen to walk faster. And to get free buses, there are people who commute in and out of the city, within the city, spend hundreds of dollars a month on their commutes. And also he wants to have universal childcare, free universal childcare below the age of 5.
Yeah.
There's also a minor point which is not talked about that much, is he wants to set up 5 grocery stores owned by the city, which can provide cheap produce for the citizens. He was also known as a anti-Zionist, pro-Palestine candidate. And this is what the establishment was frothing at the mouth over and, railing against. And this goes to what you see. They really painted out that the interests of the majority of ordinary people living in New York are not the same as the interests of the people who run New York.
Absolutely.
That is what's really come out of this.
And Trump calls that communism. And people say, well, if that's communism, maybe communism isn't so bad in the United States of America.
Yeah. I mean, communism would be that and a lot more.
Yeah.
Obviously a lot more.
Yeah.
He managed to, his campaign was like unlike anything else. I think the closest we can come to it is Obama's first election campaign, the way that it was organized. But I think this was on a much higher level. There was towards the end of it, there was 104,000 volunteers. They knocked on 3 million doors, 4.4 million phone calls up to election day. And at the core of this was the Democratic Socialists of America, which is a left-wing organization which organizes this. Now, Mamdani stood as a Democrat, but he is also a member of the DSA, which has a policy of working within the Democrats.
Yeah,
we'll get to that. But but this is a huge force. The fact that they could activate 104,000 people without any name or any, being completely unknown to ordinary people, and then beat off all of the establishment politicians. That's a huge thing. As a socialist, I mean, 20 years ago, being a socialist in America would be seen as you have to hide that, or you have to be careful about where you would say that. And now, that is what the majority of voters in New York are voting for, and a huge part, a quarter of people who have, a CNN poll shows that a quarter of people who voted called themselves democratic socialists, which is a lot, which is 250,000 people in America, which obviously goes to prove what we've been saying, that there's a massive radicalization going on underneath the surface, and there's a railing against the system, and people are looking for a radical way out. And socialist and communist ideas, by the way, are on the way out. As you know, Trump has been attacking him for being a communist. Well, people are saying, well, if that's the case,
why not?
Why not? Or let's find out what it is.
Yeah, and on this, on the question of his campaign, I've been listening to podcasts, reading articles where political analysts in the United States are trying to understand how he did this amazing feat. Yeah. And they're talking about his social media, they're talking about his charisma. Oh, they're full of praise for the clarity of the message, the focus message. You know, the way that these politicos speak.
As if it's the focus that got him the elections and not the message.
Oh, they're so simple and memorable. You know, freeze the rent. It trips off the tongue. How did he come up with that? And one thing that I found that impressed me, and it's so simple as well, is after Trump was elected, Mamdani went to working class neighborhoods in New York City, and guess what? He talked to workers and asked them who'd voted for Trump. This is interesting. He talked to workers who'd voted for Trump and asked them why. Yeah. And then when they told him why, they talked about their conditions of living. They talked about inflation. They talked about rents and so on. And he listened to that and formulated it into a program that it has its limitations, but it is genuinely trying to tackle those key issues, which would make an immediate, if they were actually put into place, they would make an immediate difference to people's lives. As someone with young children, okay, I don't live in New York, but as somebody with young
London
children,
is not much different.
that free childcare would make an immediate difference to my life. And
$12,000 a year on average people pay for childcare in New York. Yeah.
And another thing that is less prominent in his campaign, but he also mentioned he was going to increase wages for childcare workers who are constantly squeezed. These demands are not, you don't have to be, I don't want to show any disrespect to Mamdani, but you'd have to be a genius to listen to working people and formulate simple demands that are targeting the problems that they face in life. But all these establishment Democrats and political analysts are saying, oh, what an amazing way to communicate the campaign. The reason I think he was skillful in the way he used social media. Yeah. Form does matter, but it's ultimately about content. And the reason that those clips became so viral was because what he was saying connected. It didn't just connect with people's general ideas about, am I a liberal, am I a progressive? It connected to their real conditions of life. And one thing he said about the campaign, millions and millions of dollars were thrown into stopping Mamdani at all costs. But he had thousands of people knocking on doors, and their eyewitness reports were showing they were knocking on doors on the spot. They were asking the people who answered, are you going to vote for Mamdani? What do you think? But also, would you volunteer to do the same thing as me? Yeah. And thousands of people at first contact on the door were saying, yeah, I'll join you. Yeah. That response came from the feeling that actually this could actually improve things, which, let's face it, in politics, not just in the United States, but throughout the world, politics has been utterly devoid of that feeling. Yeah.
Yes. At least he started the process. I mean, we have to say that the participation in this vote was relatively low. But the fact that he managed
by the standards of a mayoral election,
but it was much higher.
1969.
69, yes.
But relative to a presidential election.
But the point is that he managed to galvanize and inspire hundreds of thousands of people, essentially. Yeah. And that is, if nothing, a good start. To say the least.
We'll give him that. Yeah.
He tapped into the rage against the super rich. He also tapped into the rage against the Democratic Party establishment, because I think, from what I can read, there's a big part of his vote that came for people who voted against Trump. But there was a huge part of his vote who came for people who voted against the Democrats, because he was not seen as a part of this decrepit old elite that's been sitting on American and New York politics, for that matter, for decades, since the beginning of it. and who've been running it like their own backyard for their own benefits, for themselves and their friends. And it really highlighted the crisis of the system in that way. And by the way, people talk about Trump being a fascist, and now we have fascism in the US, and the US has gone to the right. Where's the fascism here? It's the opposite. And we explained this when Trump was elected a year ago, almost to the day. We explained this is a distorted expression of a bubbling, seething class anger, which exists everywhere in the States and everywhere in the world for that matter, but everywhere in the States. And just like it was expressed through Trump, because no one else was giving it any expression, it could swing over and gain a left-wing expression. That's what we see here.
Yeah, that is what Mamdani has done to a large extent. And actually, one thing that came to mind as you were speaking then is an example, I think, of this rage. You know, working class voters turning to Trump, depicted as, if not fascism, some form of just stupidity. Oh, they don't know their own interests. They're voting for a fascist. How stupid.
Yeah.
Not talking to these people, not listening to them. And an example of the class anger that you were talking about, I encountered in the Financial Times. This journalist had attended a big meeting of Catholics, actually. It was a big Catholic meeting to commemorate some edict from the Pope in 1891, I think it was, about how unrestrained capitalism was bad, revolutionary socialism also bad, according to the Pope. Yeah. Therefore, workers and bosses have got to work together. That's what they were. So it was some kind of like cross-class Catholic conference. Yeah. A lot of alliteration there. Hosted by the Teamsters Union, which has been relatively more favourable to Trump. So a workers' organisation, but also attended by Democratic politicians, Republican politicians, all unified by Catholicism. And anyway, this journalist interviews workers at this meeting from the Teamsters Union. And one of them, I think, made a very interesting comment. He said, "We know Trump is a greedy boss, but we'd rather have a tough, greedy boss than what he described as blue dogs in the Democratic Party, who constantly put on pro-labor clothes, claim they're doing this for us, and then deliver absolutely nothing. We know what he is. We know he's a boss. But if he's going to raise tariffs and tackle immigration, which for these workers they saw as a link to increasing their wages and improving jobs, if he's going to do that in his own greedy boss interests, then better that than have someone pull the wool over our eyes one more time." Now, of course, there's another side to this that, well, what happens when they're disappointed by Trump?
Yeah.
Are they just irresistibly veering towards fascism, or is this an expression of working class anger?
Yeah.
It might have confused aspects, it might be misdirected, but it is clearly a class anger. And actually, a Democratic politician, somewhat hypocritically, I think, who attended this meeting, went on to say, when trade unionists and so on have turned to Democratic politicians and claimed things are getting worse to me, what establishment Democrats have tended to do is come back to them and say, but we passed this bill and passed that bill. But none of those bills have either finally got through or made any difference to their lives. And she said something which I think is actually quite pithy, which is, you can't eat an idea. You can't eat words, all these empty promises. And I think that it was exactly that motivated people voting for Trump, and it's something that's motivating people from voting for Mamdani
people
as
feel
well.
disenfranchised. People feel the system and the parties of the system don't represent them. I got a quote from Mamdani's acceptance speech. There's a lot to be said about that, but I think the opening is quite significant. He says, "For as long as we can remember, the working people of New York have been told by the wealthy and the well-connected that power does not belong in their hands. Fingers bruised from lifting boxes on warehouse floors, palms calloused from delivery bike handlebars, knuckles scarred with kitchen burns. These are not hands that have been allowed to hold power. And yet, over the last 12 months, you have dared to reach for something greater. Tonight, against all odds, we have grasped it. The future is in our hands. My friends, we have toppled a political dynasty." Now, one thing is the fact of what has happened and has the dynasty really been toppled or not. But these words are like fire if you're a worker. If you're a worker, you're not involved in politics normally because you've been told that you don't understand it. You think you don't understand it. The people who run it are running rings around you and acting towards you in a condescending and arrogant manner. And then this guy comes and says, your hands, your labor, your thoughts, it matters, and you should have power. You should grasp power.
It's a powerful statement.
That's a powerful statement. And it resonates in the embryonic, how do you say, class interest of the working class, which is
Absolutely.
well, it's not an embryonic, it's a class interest, but it's not being expressed yet. But it actually it brings it to the fore, and for a lot of people, this will resonate with them. They're gonna feel this is exactly what I've been feeling, but not been able to vocalize. And so it's a powerful statement, and it is kind of a damning indictment of the whole of the ruling class and their system that hasn't been able to do anything. I mean, this guy had everyone against him. Trump was against him. Democratic Party establishment, Wall Street, the super PACs. And what have they shown now is that you can take on all of these people and you can win. And that's what the working class is taking away from this. An extreme level of confidence in their abilities. They no longer think of themselves as mealy little worms or insignificant, whatever that they're told that they are. But that, no, actually, if you go for it, you can achieve things. And I think that's an incredibly powerful thing that the bourgeois are more afraid of than any programmatic demand that Mamdani might have.
Yeah, absolutely.
But obviously, this is also happening at a time where none of the things that brought Trump to power has been solved. There's been a increasingly large wave of layoffs, job cuts. Amazon has just announced they're going to cut 30,000 jobs. That's 10% of their workforce. Most major companies are either stopping hiring or cutting. I talked with one of our U.S. comrades yesterday, and he said there's been 1 million jobs lost over the past year.
Right.
So jobs has just disappeared. Repossessions are at a record high. The cost of living, inflation has not subsided. It's still biting.
It's about 3% now, I think.
Yes, and now you have the government shutdown, which is like barely spoken of. I mean, it is in the U.S. obviously, but which is the civil war between these parties, which has now led to the end of food stamps, or a cut in food stamps.
Yeah.
Which means I spoke to another comrade today who has a friend in a poor neighborhood in the Bronx who was saying that everyone is panicking because where are they going to get their food from? This is something that 43 million people rely on to get stable food.
I've seen pictures of long snaking queues outside food banks.
Yeah.
With people in uniform, as in military uniform, standing outside.
The whole system is falling apart. And there's no, Trump has obviously not solved anything.
One thing I wanted to mention actually, in relation to the cost of living, we were talking about freezing rent and grocery prices and childcare. I saw one report that said the median New York renter will spend 54.52% to be precise, of their monthly income on rent. So the majority of their income is already going on rent.
Yeah.
Your average family in New York with children is spending as much as a quarter of their monthly income on childcare.
Yeah.
So you're a young working class family in New York. 3/4 of your monthly income is already taken up by these completely basic. That's before food. That's before transport.
Before bills. Before
bills,
electricity,
you're right, yeah.
Heating, all this stuff.
How can you live on this basis? You can't. The pressure is absolutely enormous.
Yeah.
And I think that that touches both on the points that have already been raised in terms of the enthusiasm for Mamdani, but also the depth of the crisis and just how little has changed, obviously, since Trump took power.
Yeah.
But another thing that I wanted to bring up is this question of the shutdown. I mean, it's a pretty amazing, it's a pretty amazing phenomenon, really, in US politics. This is now the longest government shutdown in history. So Trump proving himself a record breaker yet again. I think it's on 37 days now.
Yeah.
SNAP, the food stamps, has been disrupted. A court ruled that they can't just stop them completely, but there's a limit to how much they're not going to be able to pay the full amount.
No.
So people are going to go hungry.
Yeah.
And people are, they have been laying off people using the shutdown as a cover. Again, the court said they couldn't do that, but people clearly are being laid off as a result. The chaos, I mean, I saw one report from JP Morgan, important part of the ruling class, as I understand it. They said that for every week that the government shutdown continues, 0.1% is shaved off GDP. This is at a time when the Federal Reserve is going to cut interest rates. Even though inflation is still higher than they want it to be, they're going to cut interest rates. Why? Because they're worried about these job losses you're talking about, a slowdown in the economy, the prospect that the economy might at some point go into recession. So you've got all these pressures that the capital, you would think, and you'd be correct to think, that the purpose of the bourgeois state is to maintain the stability of bourgeois rule, political rule, but also to maintain the stability of the economy, to make sure the capitalists are making money. And usually that is absolutely what it's for. But with this shutdown, you're seeing a point where the two wings of the US political establishment, really, the Republicans and the Democrats, they're not so much like political parties, the democratic structures. They're more like just parts of the state itself, factions of the bourgeois state and its bureaucracy. Their clash is creating even more danger for the economy itself, which is, of course, not what all these different rules and constitutional, jiggery-pokery were designed for. One thing I find very interesting in this situation, something that's been emerging for some time, is how all of the instruments of maintaining the stability of bourgeois rule, all these checks and balances, things like the filibuster rules, where you can basically just kill, even if the government has a majority, you can kill one of their bills, and they don't just need a majority, they need 60% of the Senate to get this budget through, to override these filibuster rules. That's so that in the old days, that was designed to, well, it still is designed, that the establishment are able to, and the different wings are able to come to some kind of compromise so that nobody goes too far and the stability of the whole show continues. Now, a rule that's intended for stability is turning to its opposite. It's turning into actually a factor contributing to the crisis of US capitalism. And I think we have to take special note of that, because that is a sign of something that we as Marxists identify as the ruling class actually losing control of its own system, really. The ruling class no longer being able to rule in the way that it had become accustomed to in the past.
Yeah, and the political result is clear to see. We saw the Republican Party. The ruling class lost control over the Republican Party. Trump is a billionaire. He's a capitalist, but he's not. He's kind of an outsider. He's a break-off from the capitalist class in that sense. He's a bit of a renegade, and he took over the party. And here you have a similar situation happening in the Democratic Party. It's not that now the socialists are taking over the Democratic Party.
Not at all,
But it's clear that the Democratic Party establishment, traditional establishment, they've lost control. They can't control the situation as they used to.
Partly because they're so despised.
Now some of them are also thinking, well, we can maybe use this kind of as a left cover to rebuild authority. But nevertheless, they are in a deep crisis. In fact, the Democrats, this is interesting. I mean, Trump has been in power for a year. He's not solved anything besides expelling lots of immigrants. I don't think he's actually carried out any of his promises to the full. Even the tariffs are
not successful anyway.
Not successful. Definitely not with any success. And yet, Trump is more popular, has more favorability than the Republicans and the Democrats. This is a rolling average of polls made by Real Clear Polling, which says that Trump has a favorability of 44.2% and unfavorable 51.4%. So still most people are against him. That's a spread of -7. The Republican Party is 40 versus 53, so that's a spread of 13.4. The Democrats are the most unpopular of these three institutions. 33.4% favorable, 59.4% unfavorable, a 26% spread. They're despised.
And deservedly.
And deservedly so,
And that actually reminds me about something in the reaction to Mamdani's victory, that Chuck Schumer, who did not endorse Mamdani at any time, was celebrating his victory as well as the victory in other elections in Virginia and New Jersey. I think governor elections. These are more like establishment Democrats. One of them was a former CIA agent. These are not like democratic socialists. They also won, due in no small part to dissatisfaction with Trump's failings. But Schumer was lumping all three of these together and saying, see, this shows that, sensible opposition to MAGA extremism and Trump. This is basically there's a new wave behind the Democrats. And also I saw in the bourgeois press and Financial Times saying talk about the Democrats were on the mat and now they get lumping it all together as a rejuvenation of the Democrats. I think this is a case of spin and wishful thinking, to be honest. As the point you already made is absolutely correct, that in reality, the vote for Mamdani, we saw it in the primaries, and I would say the actual election was a continuation of the primaries in this respect. It was a vote against what people see as the real Democrats, what correctly see as the real Democrats.
And that's the significance of this election. From our point of view, from the point of view of communists, the significance of this election is that it shows the anger, the revolutionary potential that exists in society. Now, of course, another key question is he going to succeed? Is it feasible what he's proposing, and how is it going to be carried out? Now, he has proposed these different things. New York Times made a calculation of how much it would cost to incorporate Mamdani's election promises. And they calculated around, I believe, $9 billion per year it would cost to, in particular, the biggest part of this was the childcare, which would mean the setting up of probably several thousand nurseries, kindergartens, and the hiring of thousands of people. Although they said that would be on a very, very low age of $38,000 per month, which is the average now, which is very low for New York.
38,000 per year.
Sorry, per year, which is very low for New York. And it should be almost twice that, at least, for a living wage. Anyway, they made a series of other calculations as well. Now, you would think, okay, and Mamdani has said, we will carry this out by raising taxes on anyone making more than $1 million a year by 2%, and raising the highest corporate tax band, I believe, by 7%, by 4%, from 7 to around 11%. Now, on the face of it, you would think, okay, this should be doable, but there is a huge opposition to this. The landlords, the landlord class in New York, is a big thing. Donald Trump himself is a member of that. They've come out vehemently against, threatening a strike of capital, essentially, saying, well, if you're going to freeze rents on these houses, then we don't have any incentives to invest. I mean, I don't know what investments they made. Basically, maintenance. Yeah. They're just going to, which they haven't done, as far as I understand, for a long time anyway. And there's lots of schemes of trying to undermine this. They are trying to talk with different lawmakers to veto it. They're talking about, and they're the powerful class. They're talking about using the governor of New York State. What's her name?
Kathy Hochul or Hochul?
Hochul. We're not quite sure how you say that. And using different committees and commissions and the city council to stop these and to veto these things. I think the main thing that they're afraid of is the idea that you can have someone come into power on this program and actually deliver. Because in and of itself, it's not the end of the capitalist system.
No. Rent-stabilized apartments are roughly a quarter, maybe just over a quarter of the total housing stock in New York.
Yeah.
So he's not freezing the rent on all the apartments. I think it's 44% of rental accommodation, which is significant, but he's not freezing the rent on all apartments. So you're right, it's not going to completely eliminate landlordism in New York.
But landlordism is now becoming this kind of rentierism.
Yeah.
It's like parasitic rentierism.
Totally.
Is big business in the West now. Much bigger than it used to be 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. So therefore, the idea of freezing or even lowering and intervening in the market, so to say, is obviously something that capital shirks from. It irritates capital, and they react.
And so, appetite comes with the eating.
Yes, exactly.
If workers say that they can freeze the rents, well, why don't we set the rents ourselves? Why don't we decide?
Yeah, we've built these houses. We're the one, we've paid for them over and over and over again. There's no debt remaining or mortgages remaining for the majority of the big landlords. We're the ones who are using them. We're the ones who are maintaining them and keeping them, probably because the landlords are not doing it.
Yeah.
Why do we actually need the landlords? Which is a great question.
And another thing on that is with the grocery stores. Mamdani says, well, because it's on city land, so they don't have to pay rents, or they pay very low rents. These city-owned grocery stores are not going to sell at a profit, which is a challenge to capitalism, basically.
Yes.
And they're going to buy and sell at wholesale prices. Well, if I were a private grocery store owner, I would be thinking, well, how am I going to make a profit then? If people can just go to these stores, okay, there's only 5 of them.
Yeah.
But if I'm charging substantially more than these competitors that are effectively subsidized heavily by the city, that's not fair. That's not fair trade, and I'm going to see that as a threat to my core interests. And I think what will happen is the big store owners and the big landlords are going to hide behind the little landlords, the kind of the elderly couples who have a second home, that kind of thing, to say, you're ruining these people. Weren't you talking about ordinary people in New York? These are also ordinary people. I've already heard things like that coming out of them.
No, we talked about this on the podcast last week in Venezuela, that you had nationalized companies under workers' control, but in a sea of capitalism. And just the idea of it, because the idea was such a threat to the ruling class, that there was a strike of capital, and there was sabotage at all levels of the economy: suppliers, creditors, landlords, everyone. The totality of the capitalist class was mobilized to protect their core interests. And when it comes to their core interest, which is private property over the means of production, their right to extract profits in this society, they have no divisions. And this is what we see. They all came together behind Cuomo. These guys are hating each other. They're burning down Congress. They are taking each other to court, attacking each other. But when it came down to battling the idea of socialism and the idea that you could touch private property, you could touch the privileges of the rich and powerful, there was no divisions between them. And it's clear that this is what they're preparing now as well, to sabotage, bring him in, undermine his things. And there's a big campaign rolling now. The New York Times wrote a very disgusting editorial.
Very patronizing. Yeah.
Very we didn't support Mamdani to begin with, but we wish him all the best. And here is a little bit of advice from us.
He's inexperienced. He's an inexperienced young kid. I quite like this point about experience. You had before that, you had Cuomo, disgraced politician. No, sorry, but just before we had Eric Adams. Completely corrupt. And in the past, you've had Rudy Giuliani. Yeah. Well, I think, and in the White House itself, the Democrats happily kept Joe Biden in power when he was visibly losing mental capacity. So I think if they can do it, then Mamdani probably can do it. It's only when you have somebody, on the left putting forward these kind of ideas that they talk about experience.
And what is it they have experience in? Lying, stealing, looting, exploiting.
The machine.
That's what they have experience in. And that's nothing.
Which I'm sure is very useful.
It's nothing to be proud of. Yeah, it's nothing to blazoon. Yes, they said, this is what New York Times said. He said, he can win at least some of his skeptics. He can win us over by getting results as a mayor. He should start by building a leadership team light on democratic socialists and heavy on officials with records of accomplishment and proven management skills. Proven skills in managing the capitalist system, that is. Of course,
to the
on behalf
benefit
of the capitalists, yes.
Yeah.
That's their advice.
And billionaires who were pumping millions of dollars into stopping him, like Bill Ackman, who was really virulently opposed to him, labeling him an anti-Semite and all this kind of stuff. When he won, he said, if you need my help for the city, I'll be there. All of us. And naturally, I would say this is more dangerous and worrying from the standpoint of the ruling class.
I mean, I would say this. If you are building a campaign against the billionaire class, the whole billionaire class mobilizes to attack you. And then those same people, that same billionaire class, then comes to tell you, says to you, okay, you've won now. Now here is our advice. Whatever that advice is, you should not take it.
Yeah.
That should be, I mean, a child of 6 should understand that is bad advice, right? Now the question is,
it's not well meant.
Is he taking that advice or not? And here's where I think some of the warning signs or the danger signs are creeping up because number one, the biggest thing that was debated before the election was the police commissioner, Jessica Tisch, who is a billionaire herself.
Mhm.
She's from the 43rd richest family in the United States. And she was the candidate of Cuomo. This is what the New York Magazine writes. Says, Tisch is the favorite of the city's business and financial elites. She is also very popular with the right-wing New York Post. So she's a candidate of Cuomo. She's a candidate of Trump because that's what New York Post represents. And she's also Governor Kathy Hochul's preferred choice. She is the establishment pick, right?
Mhm.
Who was there from before. And already in advance of the elections, Mamdani announced that if he was elected, he would continue with that. This is, by the way, the same police department that he accused, correctly, of racism and abuse against black people or other minorities and all sorts of things. Crimes and violence and repression of all sorts. He's withdrawn some of those statements about the police being racist. And he's trying to appease this. And he said that he would keep... This is the billionaire class. This is in every way, not just in person and also the apparatus, right? This is not the candidate of change. This is continuity.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then his transition team that he announced yesterday, he announced it as an all-female team. Now, that is obviously the headline grabber.
Mm-hmm.
That's
intentionally.
That's meant for the head. Oh yes, women are oppressed in this society, which is true. Women are oppressed, and therefore I'm gonna put women in my administration.
They must be progressive.
That must be progressive. We must support that. But these people are Maria Torres Springer, Lina Khan, Grace Bonilla, and Melanie Hartzog, who are all members of the administrations of the previous mayors of New York. The same people that he's denounced, Bloomberg, Eric Adams, and Bill de Blasio. And they are tied through and through to the New York City establishment, to the New York City government, to the bureaucratic establishment. And for Grace Bonilla, who is a non-profit boss, she's heavily tied into big business. All of her main clients and people that she worked with, donors, are Fortune 500 companies. They're through and through wedded with the establishment. And so this is obviously not a very good thing, because in order to carry out your policies, you need people who represent the class interests of the people you want to carry out the policies for. These people represent the class interests of your opposition, and they're gonna carry that out. They're gonna act accordingly.
Yeah, these are the people who are supposed to be carrying out your program, and they're opposed to it. And the people who are they're tied to by 1,000 threads are opposed to it.
Yeah.
And this raises a contradiction in Mamdani. In reality, there are two Mamdanis. Not necessarily because he's a dishonest guy or anything, he's two-faced or anything like that. I don't know him. But frankly, in all reformist politicians, there is this dualism. You saw it in Corbyn as well, where it's the politician who speaks to the workers and maybe honestly sees their problems and puts forward bold solutions and wants to mobilize them, fill them with confidence. You see that in his social media, you see that in his speeches. But then also there's the other Mamdani, which is the patient listener who's willing to build bridges with big business. One comment he made before his victory was he's had these private bridge building meetings with Wall Street and business owners and so on. Anyone who'll come.
All of the leaders of big business in New York. Even the head of JP Morgan that you mentioned before.
Yeah.
He had a meeting with him,
to represent all New Yorkers. Yeah. And at that meeting, he said that he was ruling out any ideological litmus test. Now, what does that mean? Often reformists will talk about, it's not about ideological purity. It's not about ideology. It's about getting things done. It's about pragmatism.
Yes.
I know what I want to achieve. But how he says, like he told them, I know what I want to get done, but I'm wide open on how to do it. Like Groucho Marx said, these are my principles. If you don't like them, then I've got others. He's effectively saying that. He's saying, I'm not wedded to raising taxes. How are you going to fund this program? He wants to raise taxes by a fairly modest amount, Kathy Hochul says, well, I'm going to veto that. A Democrat, by the way, the Democratic governor of New York State says, well, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so he said, well, I'm not wedded to that.
Yeah.
If we have to fund it with cuts, well, where are these cuts going to come from? Already this ambiguity is seeping in even before he takes power. And that is a very concerning sign. And that team, which Mamdani is that team going to represent? Is it going to represent the democratic socialist or the socialist Mamdani, or is it going to represent the capitalist politician that is inherent within the system? I mean, let's not be naive. The way that the mayor's office works is not that you have this all-powerful mayor who just decides things and then all of a sudden policies are put into place. Yeah. There's an enormous bureaucracy. I saw that the police force alone is larger than the Belgian army. I think there's 300,000 people who work for the city of New York.
Yes.
And within that, you have working class people, many of whom I think will have voted for Mamdani and who would support his program and who have the management skills, whatever technical skills required to actually run this city on a working class basis. But then at the top, you will have career bureaucrats who are completely, that you've already listed, that are, and more than just the people you've listed, who are completely tied to the capitalist system, both in terms of their material interests and their outlook, who are going to resist you and undermine you at every turn. I mean, even Trump is a capitalist politician. I think we're all agreed with that. Yeah. Even he has been resisted by big time by the state bureaucracy. Yeah. How is Mamdani going to overcome that? If he overcomes that by basically having nice backdoor meetings with them, or backroom meetings, and convincing, no, we can get along, we'll find a way to muddle through together, or is he going to get his policies through by purging that reactionary layer within the state bureaucracy? And then, of course, that raises the question, how do you do that? What vehicle do you need to do that?
Yeah, I mean, Lenin explained and Marx and Engels explained that this idea of a division of powers in the state, in reality, that the legislative and the executive powers is separate, is actually a fig leaf for the real state of things, in that every bourgeois democracy is a dictatorship of capital. Yeah. And the enforcer of that dictatorship is a capitalist state, a tiny minority of which is elected, although they have lots of strings attached, and there's a very refined method, like it's happening with, like there's an attempted thing happening to Mamdani now, of pull them in. But 99.9% of the state apparatus is not democratically elected and is not held account democratically. They're held account to the capitalist class. Yes, it doesn't include the police officers on the ground and the firemen and social workers and all of these people who work for the state, but it does apply to the upper crust of the state bureaucracy who serve one master only
and run the show.
And we see that every time there's a left winger. We saw this again, referring to the Venezuelan revolution. Here you had a revolutionary movement. The president was elected again and again and again with like 60-70% of a vote, had the support of millions of people, and yet because he didn't touch the old state apparatus, the programs and the initiatives that he took were constantly undermined and sabotaged from inside by the state bureaucracy, who was still tied to the bourgeoisie.
And that's why Lenin says you got to dismantle the state bureaucracy.
You got to dismantle them and replace them with an entirely different. Or we get to that in a minute. But I want to say this thing of there's two ways of fighting Mamdani. There's the direct assault, which is that Trump has tried. He's a communist, and that Wall Street has been trying to do so far. But there's a more dangerous, more insidious one, which is trying to embrace him, to bring him in. I saw that Obama called him twice, and there's been leaked, unknown nefarious forces have leaked this, and offered to be his sounding board, right? And there's a part of the Democratic Party establishment which realizes which way the wind is blowing, and thinks that they can bring these guys in, co-opt them, and undermine them, to detach them from their base on the ground, but also to use their charisma and their appeal to revitalize and to bring them back into power, essentially, to reestablish their power. In a way, that's what they've done to Trump as well. There's a similarity, at least, in the sense that the Republican Party establishment has bided its time. We've talked about this. They bided their time, And as they sabotaged, they kind of stopped him from carrying out some of the things. They didn't want him to end the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Absolutely clear, for one. Not that he has the interest of the working class at heart,
No.
or but he's a reactionary. But he wanted to end the war in Ukraine. They didn't allow him to do that. And they used the disappointment that set in from that to pull him in deeper in. Now he's clearly a faction of them are pushing him to a confrontation with Venezuela. Another faction is now pulling him in towards Nigeria. We need strikes in Nigeria. This is the Ted Cruz and the evangelicals and all of that. And he's becoming more and more a hostage of these guys. The base of support that he used to have when he came to power, he had a huge base of support. He was called them in anytime any Republican would go against him. He would just unleash the dogs, so to say, the mass of people, of workers and poor and so on, who supported him, to come in and unseat them or do whatever they wanted to. But now, as those layers are becoming more and more dissatisfied and disappointed, the establishment is now gaining the upper hand, and they're pushing him more and more to do what they want. Not that what he would do was more progressive in any way, but they kind of tie him down. Now with Mamdani, it's going to be even more. They're going to talk to him about moderation. They're going to talk to him, well, you see, these are really great ideas, but we have to have all of the different points of view, and we have to make sure that, the books are balanced, and we can't do this because of this and because of that. And they're going to undermine his program. And the more he drifts into that, the more disappointed his base of support is going to be. And the more power they're going to have over him.
Because the more isolated he becomes from his base, then what else has he got to resist them with?
Exactly.
Actually, that base, the activists, the volunteers, and at least a section, the most active section of the people who voted for him, that's all he has.
Yes.
Really. That's all he can rely on. Those are the only people he can trust.
Yes.
And the more he moved, it's like, Antaeus in Greek mythology, who drew his strength from his mother, the earth, and the way that Hercules beat him was by picking him up and lifting him off the ground, and then he could break his back and crush him. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. And they've done it many times before as well. This is something they're very, very skilled in doing. Yeah. And it's something that any socialist, democratic or otherwise, should be able to recognize. Like, let's face it, we are in a war, we're in a class war. Yeah. And when the enemy is shelling you and charging at you, it's quite obvious you're in a war. Yeah. And you can, get up for the fight. Yeah. When they take a tactical retreat and all of a sudden start inviting you for negotiations and pouring sweet words into your ear, there's still a war going on. They're still your enemy. Yeah. And that's exactly what's happening now. Yeah.
Now, what is the way forward? I think that's important, because we can come here and be clever and criticize and say that's not going to work, that's not going to work. But we should point a way forward. Now, let's start with housing. In the New York Times has a few interesting articles about how he's been charming the landlord class in New York. And one of the statements that he came out with was that he does appreciate the role of the private sector in housing. Now, the question we have to ask, first of all, what is the role of the private sector in housing? What is the role of the private landlord? Besides just sucking off resources, funds, money out of ordinary people. What is the role of the landlords? They are the most the parasitic you can get. They don't do anything. They don't produce anything. They don't develop anything. They don't make anything run. They just sit on their asses and they take rent income. Why should they exist? They didn't build the houses. They don't make them run. If any, the only people who maintain the housing stock in New York is the janitors and the workers and ordinary people who live in the houses. They play no role whatsoever. And surely, once the attack of these guys, first, I mean, this should happen without an attack, but they will mobilize to attack and undermine Mamdani and his program and his initiatives. Well, the response should be, we can't afford you guys, and therefore we must expropriate and take over the housing stock. There's thousands of. One of the comrades was on social media. It was a very, very nice clip. Maybe we can link to it. Maybe we can tell our technicians there to link to it in the description. But he was saying, yeah, there's thousands of empty flats, speculation flats, but also apartments, or also that's what they call them over there. We call them flats here, but also apartments which are just taken off the market because the landlords don't feel like they can make enough profits out of them to keep the rent artificially high.
And that's the point of all this, the profit.
It's just profit. The point of housing should be to house people and give them a base of a civilized existence. But the point of housing in New York and in most of the world, for that matter, is to make profit for a tiny clique of people who play no productive role in society whatsoever. So the number one thing that you should put on the agenda, if you want to solve the housing crisis, expropriate the landlords. Nationalize the housing stock of all the major landlords, not the people who have one or two flats, but the major ones. And then also expropriate the construction companies in order to set in motion a program of building houses, renovating, modernizing the housing stock.
Yeah, on this point, someone might say, okay, well, yeah, the landlords that have already existing housing stock, okay, their only job is to maintain the apartments. But there's also the role of the developers. So when Mamdani has acknowledged the need to build more housing, not just rent,
200,000 houses he's promised.
New York Times estimated that I think it was something like 500,000 more apartments are needed in the space of the next 10 years, if I remember correctly. And so he has said, well, yeah, the private sector has a part to play. So not just in maintaining current housing, but in building housing. But these developers, these so-called property developers, why are they building flats or apartments? To make a profit? Are they going to, and he's talked about 100% fixed rent stabilized apartments. Well, if they can't get a big profit from building these and speculating on rents being higher and higher and the value of this property being higher and higher so they can sell it on, they're not going to do it. We see this in London. London is covered in half-built apartment blocks where some property developer, just pure speculation, has started throwing them up and then goes to the council, sometimes they're building on council land, and they say, oh, well, we can only really make this work economically if you let us build more stories and if you give us a higher proportion of just free market prices. And so the proportion of what's called social housing or affordable housing that was originally agreed is slowly but surely undermined. Why? Not to provide housing for people who actually need it, but just to create profit for these developers. So the role of apartments are being built in London, but clearly it's not doing away with the housing crisis because they're only being built for people who can afford to pay super high rents. And I get the impression that the same thing is happening in New York as well, probably on a bigger scale, actually.
Exactly. And you have the infrastructure, the question of the buses. I mean, New York, I was in New York how old am I now? 24 years ago. 23 or 4 years ago. Right. And what surprised me, I haven't been there since, what surprised me back then was how the whole city was falling apart. The public transportation system, the roads, the houses, it's just, and as far as I understand, not much has happened since. It's a decaying city in a decaying system, basically. Because the bourgeois have just been busy, again, just sucking out profits as much as they can. No one is interested in developing and modernizing much. Obviously, the same would then apply to there. That developers who sit on these huge productive forces, machinery, expertise, workforces, and organizations that they suck profit out of, should again be taken over and used as nationalized, as one nationalized developing company, which could mobilize tens and hundreds of thousands of people to modernize the city from the ground up, and in doing so, also place it with good infrastructure, buses, subways, and whatever else is needed. He's also talking about tax the rich. Taxing the rich has become a big slogan, but how do you carry out taxing the rich? You can obviously we're not opposed to progressive taxation, but the thing is, you can't control how the rich manage their wealth. They can move it out. They can do a strike of capital. You can be sabotaged through the political system, through the state apparatus who's supposed to pass these things. And it's clear that they're going to resist this as much as they can. So how do you actually carry out all of these programs? If not by mobilizing precisely what you talked about, your base, the 100,000 workers who came to canvas with you, can be the backbone of a movement, to support and build up to build up a movement that can actually carry these things out. Because the state apparatus, the government apparatus, and the top echelons are not going to carry any of this. They're going to resist it with any force they can. So you need to build a movement. You need to build a political party. And what's interesting is that this campaign was run entirely by Democratic Socialists of America, which is the left-wing organization, according to itself, calls itself socialism, wants to fight for socialism. It was not carried out by the Democratic Party. It's true that they used the platform of the Democratic Party. That probably did give them a boost. But their membership in New York alone has gone from 5 to 10,000. And I think the potential is far more than that. Why link yourself to a party which is through and through wedded and controlled by the ruling class? If you want to carry any of these things out, we can see the only way to carry out your promises is by challenging the ruling class where it counts, head on the question of property. Who controls the means of production? Who controls the wealth in this society? We're not talking about property rights of a small family or a small shopkeeper or a small whatever business person. But the big businesses, the big banks, Wall Street, the big developers, the big landlords, who do not contribute anything to the society, then rot. And the only way to actually build up a movement against them is to mobilize the base on a clear working class program. You cannot do any of this if you do not break with the Democratic Party.
Absolutely.
And as long as Mamdani is wedded to the Democratic Party, he's bound to be sucked in and fail, in fact. And then you're going to see massive disappointment setting in with him and the idea of socialism, with which there's nothing wrong with. It's not socialism that's the problem.
At the beginning of this segment, you quoted Mamdani's acceptance speech, where he talks about the hands of the workers grasping towards power, being told by billionaires, power is something for us, not for you. He's raising the idea of workers' power in a vague, rhetorical way, but he's saying people like you can actually have control over society. What you've just spelled out in a program that could actually change conditions for workers in New York. What you're talking about is giving the working class of New York control over their city, real control over the economy, over property, the planning of production and infrastructure in New York, which requires the working class being in control of the city and obviously beyond. But then, how do you? And you know that's obviously not what Mamdani's fighting for, but that's the idea that he's raising in people's mind. How do you square that then with this idea of the workers having power, whilst at the same time rallying support and trying to basically rejuvenate arguably the main party of US capitalism?
Yeah.
In a campaign rally speech in October, before he took power, before the election, Mamdani actually quoted Thomas Sankara, the Burkinabe revolutionary leader, saying that for fundamental change only comes from the courage to turn your back on the old formulas, the courage to invent the future. Now, is running, not only running as a Democrat, but ruling as a Democrat, with exactly the same bureaucrats that were in charge before, with the same billionaire police commissioner that was in charge before, is that a new formula or is that an old formula? Is that putting working people in power, or is it only putting them in power in a purely rhetorical sense, which people will eventually see through? There is a serious contradiction there. That it is, as you say, it is simply impossible to achieve what Mamdani states that he wants to achieve, both in terms of his specific reforms and in his broader project, his stated project of actually elevating working people in New York and the wider United States. It is impossible to achieve it in a party like the Democratic Party. He talks about, in the same campaign rally, so in the same speech that he quotes Sankara, he talks about the battle for the soul of the Democratic Party. Now, What are we fighting for here? Are we fighting for working class power and socialism, or are we fighting for the soul of the Democratic Party? Because those are two different things.
Yes.
What is the soul of the Democratic Party? To the extent that the Democratic Party has any soul whatsoever, it is the soul of US capitalism and US imperialism. This is the party of the Vietnam War, let's not forget. This is the party of Bill Clinton incarcerating millions of black Americans. This, at no point has the Democratic Party ever been a party of the working class. Yes, it has lent on the working class. It has relied on the corrupt leadership of the trade union movement. It has working class voters. That's a different question. It's never been a party of the working class, and it's certainly never been a democratic socialist party. So the idea that you are going to somehow convert the soul of the Democrats, a party which is tied by a million threads to the same billionaires, that in the same speech he says, Bill Ackman says that thinks I'm an existential threat to the billionaires. Well, he's right. Is he right? But are you going to take a party of the billionaire class in the United States, which has complete control over the structures of the party? It's not some party where you can go to a conference and just vote out the billionaires and their representatives. You're going to turn that into a vehicle for workers' power. Yeah. It's simply not possible. The only way that you are going to put the working class in power is with a workers' party, and a revolutionary party, I would argue.
I mean, I can only agree. Now I have a quote for you because, well, I have two quotes.
A battle of quotes.
Yes.
Mamdani does like a quote.
I have a quote of a quote because Mamdani quoted Eugene Debs, who is an American socialist who stood as an independent socialist candidate in the early 20th century several times, and on one occasion, 1920, won 1 million votes while being in prison for his anti-war stance on World War I, by the way. Mamdani quoted Eugene Deb in his acceptance speeches, where Eugene Debs said, "I can see the dawn of a better day for humanity." Right? Now, I don't know much about Eugene Debs, but I looked up some of his speeches, and I found this quote, which I think is quite striking. It says, "We are today entering upon a national campaign of the profoundest interest to the working class in the country. In this campaign, there are but two parties and but one issue. There is no longer even the pretense of difference between the so-called Republican and Democratic parties. They are substantially one in what they stand for. They are opposed to each other on no question of principle, but purely in a content for the spoils of office. To the workers of the I think it's a contest. To the workers of the country, these two parties in name are one in fact. They, or rather it, stands for capitalism, for the private ownership of the means of subsistence, for the exploitation of the workers, and for wage slavery. Both of these old capitalist class machines are going to pieces. Having outlived their time, they've become corrupt and worse than useless, and now present a spectacle of political degeneracy never before witnessed in this or any other country. Both are torn by dissension and rife with disintegration. The evolution of forces underlying them is tearing them from their foundations and sweeping them to inevitable destruction." This was in 1912, but I think it applies more to today than back then, probably. There's no way forward on the basis of a pact with the establishment. Only an independent working class position can show a way forward for the American people and for the world, as we'll see now. I think we should continue to the next. We've already talked too much, but we'll continue to the next point on the agenda, which is Sudan. Now, we've seen in the past weeks, on the 27th of October, there was the city of El-Fasher, which had been besieged for more than a year by the RSF militias. The RSF is a rapid support forces in Sudan. Fell, and there's been a lot in the media talking about the massacres that's been taking place there. Thousands of people, bodies lying on the streets, extreme sectarian violence, anti-black African racist violence. Rapings, torture, beatings, and all of a sudden, the bourgeois media has suddenly discovered what's going on in Sudan, which is an absolute catastrophe, which is not reduced to the past couple of weeks. It's been going on for years. as of November, which is now, 12 million people have been forcibly displaced by a civil war that's been raging for more than 2 years. 7.2 million of these are within Sudan. 4.2 million have escaped out of the country into South Sudan and Egypt. There's reports of 150 to 200,000 people killed in this civil war. 25 million people are facing acute hunger. It's an absolutely disgusting, barbaric situation that the people of Sudan have been forced into. And the two forces that are fighting this civil war are, on the one hand, the Sudanese armed forces, which is the traditional military of Sudan, which in April took hold of Khartoum, the capital. They hold now the center and the east of the country. And the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, which is led by a guy called Mohammed Dagalo Hemeti. I think that's what a Sudanese comrade once told me. That's how he's pronounced it. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Hemeti. He leads the RSF, which is a militia. We'll come into more what it's about. They now control more or less the whole of the Darfur region. I think there's one holdout still in the west, and they've declared a new government for the whole of the country. So basically, what you have now is a de facto partition of the country in the east and west, with two governments claiming the whole. By the way, so it doesn't seem like the war's ended. When I was trying to read up on this, because it's been a while since I've been looking into Sudan, what really stood out was how the media, in particular in the West, are talking about the United Arab Emirates, who support the Rapid Support Forces. By the way, they're the ones who carried out the atrocities in El-Fasher. They are a very, very reactionary militia based on tribal, very backward tribal elements, lumpen elements, child soldiers, with an extremely reactionary, racist, and religious ideology. And the people who were kind of called out as the main perpetrators of this is the United Arab Emirates, who are the backers of the RSF.
The main backers.
They do not want to negotiate. They don't want to give in. They don't want to have a ceasefire. There was a ceasefire called a few months ago, after which the RSF did what they did. So they basically used it as a cover to buy time. They can't come to an agreement. On the other side is reasonable. We're set to assume the reasonable supporters of the central government, which is mainly Saudi Arabia and Egypt. But other countries also support the central government. De facto America, because of its allies there, is leaning towards the central government, although it's not taking sides. The Ukrainians, even the Russians, have some collaboration with the central government. But first of all, I think we should discuss about the hypocrisy of all this. Now, who caused this situation? Who have been intervening in Sudan for decades? First of all, Sudan was a colony of Britain,
as was the UAE, actually.
As was the UAE, as was all of these countries. Kept in backwardness, even after independence. There's a history of sabotage and intervention
and counter-revolution.
Supported by the imperialists of all sorts, by the Americans, by the British. Omar al-Bashir, the previous dictator who was overthrown in 2019, he fell out with the West. He kind of supported Islamist forces. But Obama, our good friend Obama, who was a friend of Mamdani, by the way, he lifted sanctions on Bashir. Why? Because the CIA asked him to. They had a very big headquarters in Sudan, in Khartoum, that they really liked. And therefore, they asked him to end it. He was then, and his soldiers, some of them which are RSF, were then enlisted as a part of the war in Yemen, which was waged by Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and the Americans, and the British, by the way. And they paid $2.1 billion in return for the favor of sending these mercenaries. Then you have the EU, who has been literally funding and training the RSF for years as what? As a means of acting as border guards from preventing refugees from going through Sudan to Chad and then to Libya, basically.
Which is their policy all over Africa as well.
This is something they've been doing until recently, until the civil war broke out in 2023. There's an article in something called Investigative Journalism for Europe. It's a very damning article. It's called the EU's Pact with the Devil. By the way, the RSF originally came from a group of militias called the Janjaweed, which means devils on horseback, because that is what they were known for. And they say, in the current context of massive human rights abuses, Western democracies can no longer have an openly good relationship with him. They're referring to the head, the Hemeti, the head of the RSF. But his emissaries are still received discreetly in European chancelleries. Yet most Europeans are unaware of this, and the European states' good relationship with Hemeti has consequences today that they hadn't planned. Without the EU's recognition, Hemeti would most likely not have the legitimacy to claim the power and launch his country into a deadly civil war, a war that might endure for years to come. In other words, they all participated in this. They all participated in the building up of the RSF, and we'll go into the whys as well. There's lots of interest here. There's the stop of the flow of immigrants. There's the general looting of the oil and gold and minerals of Sudan. And there's also the defeat of the crushing of the revolution in 2019, which was done by the hands of the RSF. But I think it's important.
And the responsible official state.
And the so-called responsible army. That's the other thing, because they say, oh, the RSF is carrying out human rights abuses. But so does the army. It's true that some of the methods and the kind of the ideological basis of the RSF is
especially
reactionary, bloodthirsty.
That's true.
But raping, torturing, indiscriminate killing, terrorizing with killings, summary executions, bombing of public, like places like marketplaces, just bombing them indiscriminately. There's something that the army has done as well. But obviously, the army is not the one that's popping up in the media, grabbing headlines at the moment. They're trying to hide behind with the Western establishment, basically. Yeah. What do you think? Do you have any comments?
Well, I think I probably speak for a lot of people following these events and listening to the rap sheet that you just gave of the indescribable horror. I know you gave some examples, but in reality, it's indescribable, unimaginable horror.
What I said is a very mild reflection of what really happened.
Yes.
Because it is horror without end. That's what it is. It's hell on earth.
We'll never know the full extent of it, I think.
Yeah.
I read one thing that aid workers in refugee camps expecting a huge influx of people from El-Fasher were surprised at how few people have arrived so far.
Yes.
The conclusion they said is that, well, that's because they're either dead or still forced in hiding in the city. People, mothers and children walking for days on end without food or water, children completely traumatized, as you'd imagine, from witnessing who knows what. Destruction on the same level, in fact, probably on a greater level of what we've been witnessing in Gaza. Just going on.
Yeah.
And I think what the reason why I say I think I speak for everyone is because I think at first sight when you look at this, it seems utterly bewildering. The sheer scale of the atrocities and the horror and the convoluted mess of different local and world powers all getting stuck in and just creating a complete wilderness in Sudan. You already gave the quote. There's a quote from Lenin that we quote so often that almost it becomes a bit of a cliche, doesn't it? That the continuation of capitalism, particularly in the ex-colonial countries, is horror without end. That is what is taking place in Sudan. And we don't just mean horror without end from 2023. This is not the first civil war that Sudan has experienced. I believe it's the third since independence, which isn't that long ago. It's not the first genocide that Darfur has experienced. At the beginning of the 21st century, the then Janjaweed carried out a genocide against African farmers in Darfur. And it's not the first time that counter-revolution has crushed the valiant, heroic struggle of the workers and youth and the masses of Sudan, which we're going to cover in a little bit more detail in a second. This is so. I think something that you said that really is really important and should be remembered by everybody is that this has been a long time in the making. The RSF hadn't just popped up from the desert and suddenly started wreaking havoc. The RSF, what is now called the RSF, has been groomed and cultivated and funded by imperialism and various different powers for decades.
Yeah.
Even actually going back to Gaddafi in Libya helped to fund these. He's not the main player in all this, but what really comes across is a feeding frenzy of different reactionary, bourgeois, capitalist states, all of which have their own narrow, exploitative interests, who see an opportunity. Poor old Sudan. What's Sudan's crime? To have had decades of atrocities inflicted on it. Its crime is, unfortunately, it's situated at a junction between the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa, which is a strategic location on the Red Sea, with vast amounts of highly fertile agricultural land across along the Nile, with oil, certainly before the separation from South Sudan, even more. Gold. In other words, it's too rich. It's like the Congo.
Yeah.
It's got too much natural wealth. It has too much potential to provide for the people that live there. And so that means that other powerful, some more powerful than others, capitalist states want a piece. And as soon as they see an opportunity, they will support all manner of atrocity and reaction in order to get there. It is a poetic, it's a disgusting, but it's a poetic indictment of the capitalist system as a whole.
Yeah.
Not just reactionary Arab states, but even the well-heeled, cultivated British bourgeoisie that historically have the biggest role to play in all this.
Yeah. And in fact, we're always told about Arab countries and African countries that there's backward areas and there's a lot of racist kind of stereotyping that's spread around about these countries. Sudan has had 3 major revolutionary movements at least since independence. It had a very powerful communist movement.
Yeah,
at a certain
Communist
point.
Party, an official Communist Party.
Hundreds of thousands of people organized in trade unions, controlled by the Communist Party. It has a very, very revolutionary tradition. Now, the source of this particular situation goes back to the revolution of 2019. I think that's an important...
Yeah.
We don't have a time to do a deep dive into that revolution. As I said, we have a very interesting article coming up in the next issue of the In Defense of Marxism magazine, specifically dealing with that revolution. But I would say this. I followed it at the time, and I think that was... After the Venezuelan Revolution, which was a very deep-going revolution, this was the most powerful revolutionary movement we saw on many levels we've seen so far in this century. It started without any political leadership. It was led by a group of kind of lawyers and doctors who've been striking,
engineers and teachers.
And so it's called the Sudanese Professional Association. It's like an umbrella group. We should say that while these are middle class layers in Sudan, that's a different to be a middle class
they're white
in Sudan.
collar. Yeah.
They're white collar, but they're workers, and they waged a series of very, very radical struggles in the run up to the revolution in 2019, and therefore they were seen as a fighting body. In particular, the ranks of it had very high authority in the eyes of the masses, and in 2019. Because of the extremely dire economic situation, you saw with the rise of bread prices, you saw a massive insurrectionary movement just erupting out of the blue, running out of the control of everyone, and the Sudanese Professional Association being kind of thrown at the head of it. Now, we don't have time to go into the whole of what happened, but basically what you have was a day-to-day advance of the movement on a very high level. Councils being set up across the country, workers, poor, peasants, middle class people,
and women in particular.
Women, a huge effort, mass effort by the Sudanese masses against the dictatorship of Omar al-Bashir. They were unstoppable. The army tried to intervene, swept aside. In fact, they had to pull the troops back into the barracks because the troops were fraternizing with the revolution on several occasions.
Incidentally, that's why the RSF is so important in all this. Because when the rank and file soldiers were starting to waver, you have to bring in these hardened reactionaries in order to do the job.
Yeah, exactly. And but the one thing, and I would say they organized time after time the most impressive actions. At one point, they had 800,000 people gathered outside of I believe it's the Ministry of Defense, and within a few weeks, the government just fell, and the army had to step in. Al Burhan, who is the head of the army now, who is now head of the central government, had to step in, together with Hemeti, by the way, to push aside Bashir, because if they didn't push him aside, they would lose everything. The ruling class stood to lose it. So in order to save the system, they moved the way, they shoved aside the top. This is something we've seen quite often. But the movement didn't stop. And it increasingly clashed with the military. It increasingly, because they represented continuity, like we see in New York City, is a common thread here. They represented continuity. The problem was the leadership of the movement, the SPA. Later on, they were organized in the Forces for Freedom and Change. Didn't see it as their task. They didn't understand that the main problem here was the ruling capitalist class of the country and their apparatus. There's a parallel here again with New York City, although it's very different worlds.
Yeah.
And they constantly try to negotiate with the army. The army, representing the ruling class, which was very clear on its interests and what it wanted. It wanted the masses down, pushed into submission.
It's worth pointing out that the army itself was a major property owner in Sudan as well.
Huge.
Part of the capitalist class.
Huge property owners. The tops of the army, not the ranks, which are normal working
soldiers,
class people, poor people. And, well, long story short, by the end of it, they organized 2 general strikes, which were enormously powerful. Almost 100% support for the general strike in Khartoum. 98% of the state apparatus adhered to the strike call. Now, what does that tell you? Who is the government of the country? Is it the official government appointed by the army, or is it the strike committee? You essentially had a dual power situation. You had the working masses had power in their hands. They had committees that have sprung up, the popular resistance committees. There were hundreds of them all over the country, although they weren't connected.
3,000 across the country.
3,000.
700 in Khartoum alone.
Yeah. And they controlled huge parts of the economy, the running of society.
Transport, going back to buses in New York.
Yeah, much better than the bourgeoisie could do.
Groceries, they were controlling grocery distribution.
And all it would take for the revolution to take power was for the SPA to say, we are the government now, and we're going to organize our own elections. And the army, we appeal to the soldiers to come over to the side of the revolution, shed the army tops, and we'll repopulate the top of the controlling tops of society with people elected by the people and who work for the people on a worker's wage and whatnot. But they didn't do that. Instead, what happened was at the last, they had I believe the general strike. The first general strike was on the 27th of May, 2019, and
28th of May.
Yeah, they called it off and called for elections with the army tops, who represented nothing, right? What was the response of the army tops? Was it to sit down and negotiate with them? On the 3rd of June, I remember this. This is actually, I was very moved by this event. 3rd of June, the revolutionary encampment in Khartoum, 5 a.m. in the morning, was infiltrated by Janjaweed RSF soldiers. As you said, the army couldn't trust the soldiers to crush the revolution. They had to bring in these hardened the counter-revolutionaries. They broke in and killed hundreds of people, maimed hundreds. They spread throughout Khartoum, spreading terror, raping, killing, just randomly, random people, brutalizing in every way you can possibly imagine. And what did the leaders of the RSF do? You have another wave of protests and strikes.
Yeah, and this is an important point. The masses still didn't back down after that.
They didn't back down. In fact,
just in case anyone listening is thinking, "Oh, that's the defeat of the movement." There was a whole other wave. There was
an even bigger wave of revolution.
1 million people came out on the 30th of June,
and What was the response of the SPA? Was to form a government with the head of the army and the head of the RSF. They did as transitional council, which was to be transitioning for 19 months. I don't know why. Why couldn't they just organize elections?
For order, that's why.
For order.
You need order.
Yes.
For democracy, you need order. And what does order mean? The army back in control.
Yeah. And they put this idiot liberal UN official, what's his name? Hamdok.
Abdullah Hamdok.
Abdullah Hamdok, as a figurehead, but all power was in reality in the hands of Al-Burhan and Hemeti. And then they bided it. And we said that this is a mistake, this is a crime. And they're biding their time to strike back. I remember, Fred Weston, who's a regular host here, wrote something, said that the ruling class will not shy away from any means in order to restore order over its system. And and we were proven correctly. What are your comments?
Well, I think one thing to take one step back, because I think it's a relevant point, is you mentioned about bread prices and bread subsidies. There was a period under al-Bashir, when an oil boom gave the regime a certain room for maneuver and gave out quite high subsidies. And there was a certain, at least, stabilization in the cost of living. That was massively undermined when the country was divided into what is now Sudan and South Sudan, a completely reactionary partition, stewarded by what? The United States of America.
Yes.
So just touching back on this question of the role of the West.
They provoked that split.
Deliberately
because they
to get
didn't
hold
want
of its
China.
oil.
Yeah, they didn't want China to get access to that oil.
South Sudan, very oil rich. What's happened since in South Sudan? Has American protection resulted in peace and prosperity? I think we know the answer. There's been a vicious, bloody civil war, which has also spilled over into Sudan itself. That was just one small point. The other one is this point about, I think you're absolutely right when you raise the question, well, if 98% of the workers who actually make the state run support the strike, who runs the state?
Who's the government?
Is it the so-called government,
Yeah.
or is it the head of the leadership of the strike? The people who called the strike was the Sudanese Professionals Association. It was the SPA.
Yeah.
And I just want to give some evidence of that. Don't take our word for it. This is what a strike committee in Port Sudan, an important city, now the capital of the SAF, the official army regime. They say this on the 28th of May. We reaffirm our readiness and responsiveness to all the decisions by the SPA in the context of restoring full civil authority and sovereignty, and declare our readiness for civil disobedience and an open political strike until the handover of authority into civilian hands, in other words, the overthrow of the army. And as we have previously said, the instructions are with you, the SPA, and the deed is with us.
Yeah.
So that's the strike saying, you are the government. Yeah. It reminds me of the situation in Petrograd in 1917, where the Soviets were basically saying that we will follow the orders of the Soviet.
Yeah, and not the government.
And not the government. The government basically doesn't exist, is illegitimate in our eyes.
Yeah.
One other quote, just to draw this out. This is a quote from the Financial Times, not from Marxist.com. One cannot know for sure what Russia felt like in 1917 as the Tsar was being toppled, or France in 1871 in the heady, idealistic days of the short-lived Paris Commune. But it must have felt something like Khartoum in April 2019. Yeah. Just to underline what you were saying, that was the potential that existed in that situation. And is to read this now in the present situation is only more devastating, really, to see what could have been and what was lost. I mean, just briefly on the question of Darfur and the atrocities taking place now. Yeah. When the al-Bashir, before it was toppled, when the al-Bashir regime was deliberately trying to whip up racism to divide the masses, using the question of Darfur, protesters...
This was during the revolution.
During the revolution, protesters held up signs saying, al-Bashir, you arrogant racist, we are all Darfur. Yeah. What a contrast. Yeah. That is the real face and the real voice of the masses of the revolution. Yeah. Once that voice was cut off and extinguished by the counter-revolution, then all manner of barbarism was unleashed. And this question of... So one detail we haven't mentioned is the SPA wasn't the official political leadership of the entire revolution. What they did was they cobbled together, or they formed a part of what you'd call a popular front called the Forces for Freedom and Change. So you had the SPA, who were trade unions, trade unions who played a leading role in the movement, liberals, even some Islamists, basically just a hodgepodge of everybody who was nominally for freedom and change, whatever that means. An extremely broad front who were the political leadership. And the SPA leader said, well, we're just trade unionists, so we can't play the role of this political leadership, and thus handed over leadership to the liberals, who proved to be just as reactionary, because the liberals require order and the army in order to maintain bourgeois rule.
Yeah.
And so the coalition, if you like, the body that stitched up this agreement after these incredible movements by the masses time and time again was the FFC. And each time the SPA, who could have formed an alternative, they could have formed a revolutionary working class alternative to this, threw up their hands and said, well, we're part of the FFC, we have to do as they say, basically.
Yeah.
So you see this again, radical, even fairly radical, at least terminologically radical leaders who have the support of the masses, hog-tying the workers to the ruling class,
the interest of the ruling class.
And what was their justification for that? Another reason was, well, if we have any breach of the FFC, if we don't have unity amongst democratic forces, then those divisions will be exploited by the reaction, and there will be civil war and violence and bloodshed. And so in the name of peace and stability, we're going to avoid that bloodshed, protect everybody by only aiming for the minimum, absolute minimum. So at some transition to have civilian elections and so on. And that paved the way for more violence, as we can see. Even in terms of the program, quibbling over a comrade who was present in the resistance committees told me that Western NGOs infiltrated that movement, were highly present, preaching pacifism, saying that people should be focusing on the question of whether alcohol should be legalized or not, and not focusing on social demands. And the key question, which was being debated in the resistance committees, of should we approach rank and file soldiers and get them in a systematic, organized way to break with the army and get their arms. If the movement had been armed, then actually that would have reduced bloodshed, because once the reactionaries knew they could just walk through the city and slice people to pieces, that incentivized them, didn't it? And so the liberals couldn't have played a worse role in this.
And while the liberals were trying to pour cold water on the masses, basically, and dampen the mood and tie them and kind of blunten the movement, Hemeti, who was the head of the RSF, he was brought in by the ruling class. He was always an outsider, by the way. He's a camel herder, ex-camel herder, and he's kind of he has a long. He's very ambitious, very opportunist. At one point, he was fighting for El-Fasher in Darfur against the rebels, and then he switched sides and started fighting against the central government. And then Bashir brought him in as a presidential guard and used him to weigh up against the army. But he always had this kind of very, very ambitious person. But he's also very astute. And while the liberals were kind of trying to blunt the movement, he was walking around preparing the political ground for the counter-revolution. He was going, I remember this, he was going around to chiefs, imams, all of these backward elements that represent pre-capitalist formations, backward pre-capitalist formations in Sudan. And what was he telling them? He said, "Oh, the revolution means democracy, which is a threat to your traditional position. The revolution means freedom of women, which is the threat to your stranglehold over your women. The revolution means this and that, all of the things that, yes, that was what the revolution was
demands,
bringing. The revolution was a threat to their class interests, right? And he prepared the ground. He was walking around holding big lunches and big kind of meetings, building up political support. And then they would provide him with soldiers, arms, funding that he would then use to crush the revolution. That is what the revolutionaries should have done. Should have gone and said, the counter-revolution is going to crush it. We said that on many occasions, again and again and again, that the counter-revolution is biding its time and wants to crush it. If the revolutionaries had done what you said we cannot trust the generals. We are the revolution. We are the people. We are Sudan. The army must come over. They must, instead of the old, decrepit, rotten ruling class and state bureaucracy and general staff, we must elect our own from the people who can represent the interests of the people. And prepared the path for a proper revolution. All of this could have been avoided. And what happened was exactly as
there would have been conflict, there would have been violence, but the point is that the workers and the revolution would have been infinitely stronger.
Much
and one more thing I'll add is that this conflict between a revolutionary workers' army and the more backward layers, reactionary layers that have been whipped up in the more remote parts of the country, that also could have been undermined by one of the weaknesses of the revolution is constantly just focusing on the liberal democratic demands, which did have a role. Yeah. We don't dismiss those. But introducing social demands that could have revolutionized the conditions of life of farmers and herders whose lives have been destroyed by things like climate change and by imperialism, they could have actually won over part of the base. Yeah. Again, the Bolsheviks were able to do that.
Yeah.
Use politics and use the revolution itself in order to actually win over the poorest layers and therefore drive a wedge within the reactionary forces. It's not the case that the peasantry or nomadic peoples are some homogenous reactionary bloc. But you can't do that if your movement has been stifled and tied up and then ultimately crushed because of the limitation of your own program to appease people who were always your enemy.
Yeah. And what happened was this. The liberals were used as a figurehead for the regime, which was a continuation regime. Mm-hmm. It's continuity. For all intents and purposes, the regime remained. The social contradictions remained. Poverty, hunger, malnutrition, unemployment, decay, falling apart of society, barbarism, everything remained. The revolutionary elements were tired out gradually. And also a lot of people swung to the other side. What did the revolution give us? I'm sure millions of people would have thought. What did the revolution give us? A smiling face to carry out the same crimes against us, right? And therefore, in that situation, the army and the RSF were just biding their time. And predictably, as we predicted, you go and read we'll link to some of our articles. That happened. And they moved in and they removed Hamdok when they disposed of him, when they used him. And took power themselves. But then obviously, it's thieves, what do you call it?
Thieves' kitchen?
No, like
no honor amongst thieves?
No honor amongst thieves, right? Because then you had Hemeti, an outsider of the ruling class who's always been looked down upon, but who carries the responsibility of saving the regime. And he thinks himself as the proper heir of that regime. And the traditional ruling class, which doesn't trust him, doesn't like him, sees him as too, I imagine that the German capitalists viewed Hitler a little bit like that. Having built this creature to crush the revolution, they lost control over him. And other forces started other countries started to intervene. You had the EU still supporting the RSF, training them right up until the civil war in 2023. The United Arab Emirates, which has begun to play an independent role in Yemen, it took a different stance than the Saudis. Now it's doing again here. They have an interest in the gold. They have an interest in generally throwing out the weight, building up kind of chips for playing against other bourgeois forces. And
Russia at that time was involved with the RSF for the gold.
Russia,
but then switched.
Ukraine was on the side of the army, and then you had Russia switching to the other side, fighting on the side of the army with the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
And the Egyptians obviously want stability. They're engulfed by countries falling apart. They want stability. They supported the central state. That is what's led us here. That is what's unleashed this barbarism. American imperialism. You sent me an article, which is interesting, by Foreign Affairs, which says this is the future of
wars.
Wars that never end, as a result of a decline of American imperialism.
Relative decline, yeah.
Relative decline of American imperialism, which means other powers suddenly start flexing their muscles. Powers which were previously much more controlled. But the point is, by the Americans, such as the Emiratis and the Saudis and the Egyptians, 3 American allies, by the way.
Yeah.
Right? They are fueling this civil war. But the question that comes to my mind is, no, the Americans still, and this is what you see, every podcast you listen to, every article that you read, we must stop this humanitarian crisis. The only people who can do it are the Americans. They are the backers of Egypt. They are the backers of Saudi Arabia. They are the backers of United Arab Emirates. Yes. Why are they not doing it? Because there's too much at stake. Because Trump needs the Saudis and the Emiratis. Their investments are fueling this huge AI boom that's taking place now. They have investments in the US. They have other business deals. Who cares about Sudan?
And they have a role to play with the Abraham Accords and trying to stabilize the Middle East as well.
They want Egypt and Saudi Arabia to sign the Abraham Accords. They have no interest in this. They have no interest. Let's put it like this. They might want to stop this. They might see it as a nuisance. But their interest in keeping their allies on board, it weighs higher than the interests of the working class and the poor and the peasants of Sudan and anywhere in the world. And that's why you see this capitalist system, which is just descending in parts, in particular in Africa, in parts of the world, into barbarism, driven by these individual bourgeois who have only, this is kind of like the the concentrated essence of capitalism, the short-sightedness, the extreme short-sightedness and the anarchy of the system based on profit. That is what this is the kind of crystallized essence of that process.
To give an example of that, neighboring Chad, they've had, I think, about 1 million refugees come in from places like Darfur, which is causing a lot of strain. This is not a powerful economy. Not only that, it's creating social tensions because many people in Chad are so poor that they actually think that the refugees coming into camps are getting better conditions than them. So it's actually undermining the base of the regime. But the regime in Chad is actually supporting the RSF, in part because it is tied to and benefits a lot from investment and aid from the UAE. And so you have an example here of a completely decrepit reactionary ruling class in Chad, which is being forced, not entirely against its will, into a situation which will later lead to barbarism in its own country. Exactly. And bear in mind that Chad, you talk about Egypt being hard pressed on all sides, which is correct. Chad, you've got Libya to the north, which is a failed state, in which various different parts, similar to Sudan actually, the situation that's emerged there, where there's a de facto partition of the country amongst warlords. So the west, you've got Niger, which is under a huge amount of pressure from Islamist armed groups. To the south, you've got the Central African Republic, which is almost a failed state. And then to the east, now you've got Sudan. Not a great place to be. And they're actually contributing, from the standpoint of stability of the state, they're actually contributing to the further undermining. So you're looking at an entire region of the earth, a fairly large part of the world, which is being dragged down into total state collapse and unimaginable horror. And yes, this is not some kind of exception to capitalism. Oh, if only they were more capitalist. This is the direct consequence of the continuation of the capitalist system in Sudan, in terms of the stifling and the betrayal and murder of the revolution, but also the maintenance of capitalism in the so-called advanced civilized countries like Britain and the United States.
I mean, just to kind of tie it in, we might be fighting in different places. We might be talking about the U.S., Britain, Sudan, Palestine, but we're fighting the same beast, the same Hydra-headed beast, the capital of which is in New York City and in Washington, by the way. Without American imperialism, none of these parties which are intervening now, I mean, Russia plays a minor role in the civil war. It's not the main party here. American imperialism and its allies are the ones that have been dragging Africa down into the ground. Now Russia and China are entering the fray. They also have a responsibility to some extent, in particular China. But the main criminal in dragging Africa down into the barbaric morass that it's in is American imperialism.
And Europe.
And European imperialism. I mean, we don't have much time, but just the fact that these were countries that were divided up specifically in order to rule them through ethnic tension, right?
And border disputes, enclaves, and just generally weak states that can't maintain their own borders.
That was the purpose of the way that that Africa was given so-called independence, right? So that the West could rule them. And the way that they've ruled them on the basis of capitalist, bourgeois, short-sighted interests is what we have. Barbarism. But you see, there is a choice here. And I think the reason why we're dealing with the revolution is this. There was a fork in the path for Sudan in June 2019. The masses had power in their hands. The working class, the poor, the peasants, the shopkeepers, the mass of the population had power in their hands. But they weren't conscious of it. They weren't conscious enough. They weren't organized enough. Their leaders betrayed them. And that led directly down the path of barbarism. And so what Marx said, and Engels said, and Rosa Luxemburg said, that socialism or barbarism is what lies in front of humanity. That is a very concrete, concrete question in Sudan. That the lack of the fact that they didn't take power allowed the counter-revolution back in to drag the country down, and that's why it's important to study revolutions, to study how the dynamic of a revolution and what is necessary. Because if you don't finish what you started, we can't decide whether revolutions start or not. Revolutions start, the system causes them. Capitalism causes them. But we can have an impact on whether they are successful or not. That humans have that. And if you don't learn from the mistakes of countries like Sudan, you will have a very, very dear cost to pay. And a whole generation is lost, because that's what we're looking at in Sudan. A generation of barbarism. We don't know when it's going to come back. And the hope for Sudan now, yes, the people of Sudan have very revolutionary traditions, and they will not die down. But they are condemned to barbarism for a long time to come. And the center of attention moves elsewhere. In Egypt, we have a powerful working class. In South Africa, in Nigeria. These are the three main kind of working classes of Africa. In Algeria, in Tunisia, in Morocco as well. Kenya, you had in Tanzania or Tanzania. I'm not sure how you say it, but again, you have movements here. For now, the movement is up, but if you have a successful revolution in one of these countries, one of these near abroad countries, then that will have a massive impact inside of Sudan, and that can change the situation.
Absolutely.
And in the final analysis, you need to take this struggle to the belly of the beast itself, to the heart of the capitalist world, to the advanced capitalist countries. It's the same struggle. It's the same struggle against the same system. We don't live in different. We live in different countries, but we're part of the same class and the same movement, essentially. Do you have any concluding remarks?
I do. I completely agree with everything you've just said. And listening to you, it comes to mind that really everything we've been talking about, I completely agree, we have to learn the conclusions of all this. And actually, the main conclusion that we draw from the discussion we've had about New York and the United States and about Sudan and the wider crisis in Africa is fundamentally the same. We need a revolutionary party of the working class.
Yeah.
Why was the movement betrayed by the leadership? Because it didn't have a leadership that was accountable to the working class. It didn't actually have a vehicle for completing the revolution you were talking about. Right now in the United States, there is the potential for a workers' party, a socialist workers' party in the United States of America. That potential exists all over the world. More and more people, particularly young people, are coming to that conclusion. It's never been more necessary for communists to organize, to create the basis for those parties, because as this is the only way that we can take the right path in that fork in the road towards socialism. That was what was missing in South Sudan. That's what's missing in the United States right now. We have to build it. We have to build it everywhere, and we have to build it now.
Those are perfect words to end on. Thank you very much, Josh, and thank you very much for everyone tuning in. This was Against the Stream. We'll be back again next week, Thursday, 6 p.m. UK time.